Welcome back to another edition of Unplug from Worldly Thinking. This week we're going to discuss how to become free from depression. And with me, as always, is my brother, friend, and master of the dark arts, Patrick. I'm sorry, I'm getting excited about Star Wars coming.
So am I, man. When I
Man,
left you, I always put the student. Now I am the master.
yeah.
We just
Only,
did a
only,
Star
a
Wars
ma- only
marathon.
a master of evil,
Master of Evil
Patrick.
to us. That's funny you say that. We just did a Star Wars marathon at my house here because we got, Disney Plus and all that fun stuff.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Yeah, I've been watching that, like catching up on the movies, getting ready for the number 9, the final Skywalker saga, as they're calling it, or I call it the trilogy of trilogies.
Right?
And I've been watching that as well as The Mandalorian, which is so good. Really
Yes,
enjoying that.
Mandalorian is amazing. It's so just beautifully shot. But anyways, we'll get out. That's another tangent. We should
Yeah, and
dive
if, and
into
if Star
what
Wars
that.
don't make you happy, we'll help you come up with something else that will,
There you go.
which is how to become free or having freedom from depression. All right, let's start us off with definitions as always. Merriam-Webster says depression is a mood disorder marked especially by sadness, inactivity, difficulty in thinking, and concentration. A significant increase or decrease in appetite and time spent sleeping. Feelings of dejection and hopelessness, and sometimes suicidal tendencies. To simplify, depression is to say that one is in a current state of hopelessness and despair for both the present and the future. Generally, when people are feeling levels of depression, it's because they have lost hope that the future can be any better than what their current present state of being is, or state of feeling, or circumstances. And therefore, they fall into a level of despair. So all of a sudden, their sorrow or their fear or all these other primary emotions are all of a sudden escalating and intensifying. And depression is just really people giving up, getting to that state of just don't care anymore. Maybe a state of apathy, maybe a state of I'm just ready to have this life be over with, and it's a very debilitating state of feeling and state of being even. The only potential value it has is, back in the days of uncivilized world, you get kicked out of your village and you're too proud, and all of a sudden you're out alone, and now all of a sudden depression kicks in. So maybe that depression causes you like, yeah, I need to get back with the villagers, and comply with the things that are going on there for my own survival and well-being, and also the well-being of the village. It's the only potential value I can ever see depression ever having on anybody. It's definitely not something normal, and it's something that's not necessary in non-life-threatening situations.
Right. I think we'll probably get into it as well, as we have with all of these, but it's becoming more and more normalized, I guess,
Well,
because there's just
we see that in all these
yeah,
things
just
we've covered: anxiety, depression, anger, disorders, whether they be mood disorders, whether they be depressive disorders, anxiety disorders, ADHD, OCD. Everybody's trying to normalize the abnormal.
sure.
They're
I
trying to
think
make
like
what's dysfunctional functional. Just
right,
accept me the way that I am, even though
right,
it could be better, but I don't want to have hope that it'll be better because then I'll get even more depressed than it if it doesn't. So,
right. And I think rather than trying to, as we've seen with all of these, rather than trying to treat the underlying issues of what's causing these things, is we've turned to a lot of medication and drugging ourselves up, and we've seen the consequences of those, recently here.
well, they certainly have side effects, even if they're working the way that they're supposed to, referring to like, psychotropic medications such as antidepressants, and mood stabilizers, anti-anxiety medication, antipsychotics, yeah, the stimulants. But yeah, they're all designed to do something to help bring chemicals or neurotransmitters back into balance where they've been out of balance.
Right.
But not all of them are needed long term. Things for just regular people dealing with depression or a major depressive episode or major depressive disorder. Those are not biological driven things that cause one to be depressed. Now, if you're dealing with something like bipolar 1, you're dealing with something schizoaffective, schizophrenia, dealing with things like ADHD, absolutely. Those are probably disorders that require lifelong medication. Dealing with depression in itself is not necessarily that you'll have to be on medication all your life to treat it. So let's get into some of the causes of depression. Number one, genetics and chemical imbalances. So again, if somebody's having a susceptibility to, low levels of dopamine, low levels of serotonin, it can certainly cause somebody to, have a genetic and chemical imbalance that would require it. Usually people with the genetic and chemical imbalances, again, are bipolar. And there's bipolar 1, which is where depression is one of the mood swings on one side of the pole, and hypomania is on the other side. And then that's bipolar number 2. With bipolar 1, it's depression and mania. So again, you either have a manic episode and you have depression, or you have hypomanic episode and depression. So poor nutrition can certainly affect depression. Physical health issue, which means that you have some type of ailment physically that's going on, or some physical thing that's going on that's causing you to feel despair and hopelessness. Chronic physical pain, so people who are in constant states of pain because of either injury, fibromyalgia, or other types of ailments that cause, chronic and ongoing pain. Excessive use or abuse of depressants, so again, people using marijuana, people using alcohol, people using heroin or other depressants. These things can cause people to slip deeper and deeper into depression. Abuse, which means that you're being abused by somebody physically or sexually. We talked about so many times mental and emotional abuse. That can only occur if you place value and importance on what somebody is saying or doing. Neglect, which means, physiological needs not being met, emotional needs not being met, mental and neurological needs being met. That's what we mean by neglect. And then stress.
Go ahead, Pat. With neglect too, we also talked about in other videos that a lot of that neglect can be, sometimes there's real neglect out there, but it can be perceived based on, so unmet expectations or things like that. You expect things to be a certain way, and then it's not, and so there's that feeling of neglect involved.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, perception is reality to people, whether it is or isn't the truth. How people perceive things is what's going to cause them to be in states of being or states of feeling, for sure.
Sure.
And then we talked about stress. We did our video on freedom from stress. If you haven't seen it, check it out. All of these intense emotions, anxiety, anger, depression, all have their certain levels of stress that go along with them. So be sure to check out that teaching as well, where we get into in depth on how to eliminate and be free from stress. And then loss, which can be a loss of a job, it could be loss of possession, it could be loss of a loved one, it could be loss of a relationship, for a number of different reasons and causes. So one of the things that exasperates depression is negative self-talk. Negative self-talk is always learned. Nobody just starts negatively self-talking because that seemed like the right thing to say or the right thing to tell myself. Remember, we're malleable creatures, and we basically become unique collections of the knowledge and experiences that we've been a part of. So if you're somebody who has some of these negative self-talk, you didn't probably invent them yourselves. They were probably, you're modeling them and you're behaving and acting these things out because you've seen other people do it in similar circumstances. Could be in real life, could be in TV, could be in movies, could be things you've read in a book. But again, usually negative self-talk is learned. And number 1, I'm worthless. So again, these types of things put a stigma on your state of being. You're saying, I am worthless, which means you're putting your existence against that meaning, which is worthless. There's no use in trying. I can't do anything right. I'll never follow through. People won't like me. I must be perfect. My opinion really doesn't matter. I'll never be any different. Things will never be different. So again, people, is there one more after that one, or is that the last one?
That's the last one.
That's what I was thinking. So anyways, you go back through these, there's no use in trying. That's somebody saying that I shouldn't even try and attempt to have some level of success or well-being because I'm just going to end up disappointed when it fails. That's right. That's the story and the narrative that's going along with that. And if you have these viewpoints, I can't do anything right, I'll never follow through, you're either seeking, it's attention-seeking behavior to get some level of sympathy or even perhaps validation or affirmation that no, that's not true about you, because you lack that within yourself. or it's because you really believe these things about yourself. And if you do, that's not healthy. It doesn't have to be that way. And you've learned these things from somebody else who was unhealthy. So what's required is to replace them with positive words, to replace them with words of encouragement, with words of hope, with words of love, with words of, appreciation, gratitude. And I don't mean that, hey, you're just going to tell yourself, oh, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like me. And, get into this narrative where you just have to talk yourself up in a positive way, because that's exhausting in itself as well. But negative self talk reinforces the state of being that you associate with, that leads to your state of feeling of depression.
Right. No,
Well,
a good tip, I mean, that you had gotten from, because there's some on this list that even I'm sure you and I have dealt with here. And one of the things that you initially said to me when we were kind of going through meeting in the beginning is like, are you, if you said the things that you said to yourself, would you consider yourself a good friend? And
oh,
are you
good
being a
point.
good friend to yourself? A lot of times with people using this, I'm worthless or things like that, or I've got to be perfect or any of these, it's take a look at it. And if you had a friend that was saying those things to you, they really be your friend? Probably not. So, can you be a better friend to yourself? And it's a good first step into moving past some of these negative self talk things you've been saying.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I forgot when we discussed that, but we always talk about being a good friend to yourself is we're generally nicer to other people than we are ourselves.
Sure.
We're usually harder on ourselves than we are the rest of the world. And that doesn't, it shouldn't justify how you are hard on other people just because you're hard on yourself, because like Patrick said, you're not being a good friend to yourself if you're treating yourself poorly and talking negatively about yourself or to yourself. You're reinforcing those poor characteristics or behaviors that you might currently have, but it doesn't mean that's who you're going to be a week from now. It's not who you're going to be a month from now, if you're doing things to become a better version of yourself and a healthier version of yourself. It's not always going to be that unless nothing changes. There's conditions on things. If you make time to become a better version of yourself, you are going to become a healthier and better version of yourself, because you've made time to, invite in new experiences and ideas that you previously hadn't considered. And this teaching is one of those things.
Right. I think another thing is like, a lot of times you're prepping your like after you do it for so long and things just kind of get reinforced because, well, they just went that way, and of course they were going to go that way because that's how my life is. And
Mm-hmm.
statements like that, like, you ultimately start saying these things in some senses to prep yourself for disappointment. Your mindset, I'll say your mindset creates your reality. Again, I'm not sure how scientific that may be, but really, if your mindset is always prepping for the worst, don't be surprised when you get the worst. And it's not because consciousness creates the world around us, but at the same time, like, there's certain behaviors you will do if you have a more positive attitude versus a negative attitude that will create better outcomes for you.
Yeah, and all those states of mood, or that come from the states of thought and being, affect your inner chemicals that are going on with your hormones and your neurotransmitters. So if you're always putting yourself in a depressed state by the thoughts and ideas that you have about yourself or about your life, then it's going to be this constant state of negative and down and mopey and lethargic and apathetic type of mood. And if that's the case, it's hard to break out of that. It's like, I know I shouldn't, be down here. I know I shouldn't do this. I can't motivate myself to get out of this rut. In the moment, you're right. But at some
Right.
point, how many times had you been there before and you got out of the rut? So something occurs. And most likely it was you got tired of being in the rut and you just forced yourself to get up, go do something, be active. And there's a lot of worldly coping skills that people use on a daily basis to combat their depression. Our goal is, hey, once you can get into a calm state of being even for a moment, change and reorient the way that you think about yourself and others. And we're going to talk about the truths of these things so that you can be free from ever getting to a state of depression because of how you view yourself and others. So let's go on to some of those worldly coping skills for depression. Number one, talk therapy. So again, a lot of people will seek out individual counseling, or they'll even seek out, groups or 12-step groups to help deal with depression. They'll seek out antidepressant medication, and this can be prescribed by a nurse practitioner, family doctor, psychiatrist, and basically anybody that's a medical trained and professional, which again is nurse practitioners, psychiatrists, and medical doctors, and doctors of osteopath. Journaling. So a lot of one of the tips that are even offered in counseling or therapy is journaling down your thoughts and ideas. Putting your state of being on paper so you can reflect on it later. Because usually when people are feeling calm and okay, they don't want to think about the depressive thing, but that's a perfect time to evaluate it to better understand it. You're not in that mood at the time. You're feeling
Right.
that life has some level of hope. Let's reflect on this and go, okay, what type of thoughts are going on that are dictating that feeling of depression? Or while I'm depressed, what are some of those types of thoughts that I'm doing to remain in that state of depression? Thinking positive thoughts. And again, they tell you, focus on what's positive, focus on what you're thankful for, focus on, that your life, is better than X time or X moment, or it hasn't necessarily declined in everything, but think positive thoughts. If you think good, you'll feel good. If you think negative, you'll feel negative, is a common thought in the world of psychology. I think there's more to it than that, but that is a common thought, especially in cognitive behavior theory. Share with family and friends. And again, when you can sit there and be vulnerable to somebody and share in your state of depression, everybody's afraid to do that because they want to appear stronger than what they are. They want to appear, they're more collected than what they are. They got their life together more than they do. And it's so empowering once you have the freedom to share with friends, share with family, that things are tough and difficult. And what you'll often find is they're going through something themselves or have been through it themselves.
Mm.
You're not alone in this world. You have people who are going through their own things uniquely and differently than you, and just because they've been through depression doesn't mean they understand your depression. So sharing, hey, here's some of the thoughts that are going on, here's some of the things that are going on, what's your perspective on this, say if you were me, and looking at it from a sympathetic type of viewpoint.
Right. I think what you said just there is the biggest probably challenge most people face. If anything, they're probably struggling with is like they don't want to come out and say it. Because if I come out and say it, then I'm, you know, bad or I'm this or I'm that. And then so it creates this like, well, I'm the only one dealing with this because in a sense you are the only one dealing with this because you're not reaching out for help anywhere. And it's a difficult thing to do because there is a lot of stigma around being depressed or being sad or whatever it may be.
And it's probably usually the time you're going through it isn't the first time you've been through it.
Right.
And perhaps, there's people who, are depressed, and then they find religion and they're all excited about it and life's going well and things are going to be wonderful and my life's going to turn around, and then you end up back there in 6 months or a year or 2 years or 5 years, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, I must not believe enough, or I must not be doing this good enough, or oh, I must be getting punished, and all these other, again, negative self-talk for why I'm in this state, and then feeling the levels of shame and regret and guilt because I feel depressed. And that's just a bunch of crap.
Right.
That's not the truth. You're in a state of depression because of the state of being and the state of thought that you have about yourself and what your life is. Only when that changes can you be free from depression. And it takes time to unlearn the old ways of thinking and reasoning and behaving and how I process stuff, and have a healthier perspective for yourself. That's what all these teachings about unplug from worldly thinking are all about.
Right. Well, I think also just on that point, like on the finding religion point, like what it can really, I don't know, what am I trying to say here? Essentially, what we're saying, and we'll get into it in the next slide when we go over, how to uh, freedom from depression. But basically, what we're saying is like the reason you felt depressed again is because obviously there was still something there that was causing you to be depressed, and that's okay. See it as an exciting thing. It's another thing to learn and grow from, to change, and become a better version of yourself moving forward.
Absolutely. And you have to realize that it takes time. You're not just going to be able to will yourself to feel better. You're not just going to be able to turn it around and say, from now on, I'm not going to think that way, and I'm going to be fine, and I'm going to be positive, because you were vulnerable to something to begin with to get there. Something inside you wasn't healthy, wasn't fixed, wasn't repaired, wasn't healed. And once that is healed, repaired, fixed, cognitively shifted, then and only then can you truly be free from it. So don't just think that, oh, I'm going to make up my mind that this is the way it's going to be. That's not the way it works. You got to be able to identify what are some of those things that are going inside that's leading down this path.
Yeah, it's causing it.
Yeah.
You always, the word you use all the time is determinants. What are the determinants determining that?
The determinings of the determinings.
That's right.
So, and then the next one, worldly, get adequate sleep. A lot of people are sleep deprived, or they're depressed and they're oversleeping. They're sleeping 14, 15, 16 hours a day. Can't get out of bed because they'd rather be dreaming and escaping. They're not doing drugs necessarily to escape. They're not using alcohol. They're not, overeating. They're choosing the escape to escape into extended sleep. And that's not healthy. You want to get adequate sleep. And usually for most adults, that's 7.5 or 9 hours a night to get basically 4 or 5 sleep cycles. Or is it 5 or 6? 5 or 6. Exercise. Exercise is beneficial in anything, but people can't use exercise as a coping skill, which, hey, when I feel depressed, I go exercise. Hey, when I feel anxious, I go exercise. When I feel angry, I go exercise. And when I'm stressed out, I go exercise. Yeah, exercise has a bunch of things, releases positive endorphins. It's good for our physiology and physical being, but you can't do these things as a way to escape from depression, because otherwise you're getting into escapism that leads to addiction, and that can have its own ramifications, like we talked about in the escapes and addictions teaching. But exercise is valuable, but it should be done for the right reasons, not to escape, but for the benefit that it provides overall. Adjust to a healthier diet. And again, some people's diets are just poor, raising my hand. Doesn't necessarily mean that just because I have a poor diet, it's going to lead to depression. But if you're already susceptible to getting into these states of depression or even anxiety, anger, stress, then a poor diet's going to exasperate it, and a poor diet's going to add to it. Especially if you're putting on large amounts of weight, starts to affect your physiology, starts to affect your health, starts to affect your sense of self-image or self-view of yourself. So again, have a healthier diet can help you, avoid falling into states of depression, even from a worldly thinking aspect. Avoid depressants. And these are things that can further make you feel more depressed or even increase your feelings of suicidal ideation, which is like alcohol, opioids, marijuana. Again, these are not stimulants, but depressants, because they bring down your state of being rather than heighten it, like something like caffeine will, something like cocaine will, methamphetamines, speed. And then the last thing, prayer. A lot of times, people are like, just pray, just turn it over to God, turn it over to Allah, turn it over to Jesus, turn it over to Buddha. Of course, I'm talking to my butt on some of these things because that's not the focus of what we're talking about. But people believe that, hey, if I just pray about it, or if I do the right things and say the right things in prayer to the Creator that I support, that this is a way for me to feel better. And again, it's a temporary thing to be like, I feel this, then do this, rather than I'm doing things on the inside to create inner change to me long term so that I don't fall into states of depression. And that's the goal of these teachings, is to no longer feel anxiety, no longer feel anger, no longer feel depression, and no longer feel stress, other than if potentially you're in a life-threatening situation. Again, that's when these intense emotions have value. But the majority of us throughout our lives, especially in civilized world or here in civilized America, don't experience life-threatening situations all that often, but we experience intense emotions that are there to have use of them, so to say.
Right. And the biggest, one liner here is these are all reactive. So you feel it and then this, like John said, you're reacting to something at that point. A better approach would be, proactive, so you don't feel it in the first place.
Right, because you don't want just coping skills. Coping skills help you survive, great, but they're not going to help you thrive, and that's what we
Right.
want to get to. One second here. All right. So, how do you become free from depression? Number one, realize you're never alone if you truly don't want to be. And what I mean by this is a lot of times when you're feeling depressed, you isolate. You go into seclusion. You don't feel like, being
around people.
around people. And you don't have everybody knows somebody for the most part. There's a friend you can call, a family member you can call, somebody to be around. There's a number of different hotlines that we're going to give you at the end of this presentation, so that even if you have no friends, no family from your own perspective, or if that is just a fact of life, there are hotlines where you can talk to another human being that cares and wants you to have a better state of feeling and a better state of being. Realize you've been programmed with poor coping skills for perceiving and judging the world and the people in it. Everything that you are is been given to you. The things that are great about you, given to you. The things that suck about you, given to you. The things that are positive, given to you. The things that are negative, given to you. The things that you enjoy about yourself, given to you. The things you don't enjoy have been given to you. You've learned them through the information and experiences that you've been a part of. And then you relate different experiences together and formulate an idea. Relate different information together, formulate an idea. That's what human beings do. We process and crunch information and experiences. The more we have that's positive in its nature, the more positive and healthy we become. That when we have poor coping skills and poor mannerisms and poor ways of dealing with these things, that's because that's what's been given to us by other thinkers. Realize things can and will be better once you learn about and improve your four internal processes. And again, these are biological, cognitive, experiential, and emotional. Your biological states of being take care of your physiological needs, primarily more than anything, which means, eating, drinking, breathing, adequate sleep, hygiene, taking care of yourself, making sure that you're warm and have homeostasis. And then it comes down to other biological things. Do you have chemical imbalance? Do you have a neurotransmitter or a neurological imbalance? Get those things taken care of. Get the proper diagnosis if you indeed have impairments that are biological in their nature. Cognitive, having positive sense of self-esteem, self-worth, self-confidence. We did an entire teaching on this. Go watch it if you haven't seen it yet. It can help boost your cognitive processes. Your processes are what you know, what you believe, and what you're ignorant about, what you don't understand or know, how you think and reason about things. And then your experiential is relating to your experiences. Were they traumatic? Were they negative? Or were they positive in their nature? When you experience something in the present, you get triggered by how your other perceptions that seemed similar in the past were. For me, I don't view any of my past anymore as traumatic or negative, but I used to at one point. So therefore, when I had other situations in the present that were similar, I triggered and got pulled into that same state of being and state of feeling that I was in before. And not only was I dealing with the crap in the present, I had all this stuff well up in me from the past. So I was now dealing with both of those things. When you heal experientially, which we have a teaching on experiential healing, then you can become free from those triggers that once bothered you. Then you're just dealing with the current situation. Now with the current information and experiences you've had, you're not getting re-triggered by stuff anymore. That's the freedom in that. Learn to manage your emotions in a healthy way. I don't think we've done a full emotion management, but we've already talked about stress. We've already talked about anxiety, and it's the same thing. We have five primary emotions: pleasure, surprise, fear, sadness, and disgust. All other secondary and tertiary emotions escalate or intensify from those five. So the way that you manage your emotions in a healthy way, usually pleasure, really not really trying to manage that, though there's some value at times. Surprise, we're not really trying to manage. But with fear, sadness, and disgust, if we can learn to be okay in the moment, feeling those things and then processing through them when the emotion is less intense, we have a better chance to think and reason, rather than when they start to escalate into things like annoyance and frustration, shame, guilt, regret, remorse, anxiety, depression, anger, rage, wrath, hopelessness, despair. Then it gets into thoughts of suicidal ideation or homicidal ideation. If you want to learn to manage your emotions, learn to identify one of the three emotions that must have triggered first. Was it fear or worry? Was it sadness or hurt? Or was it disgust? Because you were disgusted by what somebody else did because you lacked empathy for their situation, either cognitive or emotional empathy. So again, we talk about these things and we may just do an entire teaching coming
Think
up
we
here.
are after we get through these kind of workshop series. I think that's what we're moving into. At least
Perfect.
what we discussed
Yeah,
is really
perfect.
how do we get into what does emotion management look like? How does it work? We've mentioned it and teased it a lot, so we'll actually get into one. But I want to go back to the realize things can and will be better. That's probably the biggest one I would say, especially in the depression. This teaching in general is realize that the moment you're facing that you're depressed is just that. It's just a single moment of time where you're feeling this way. And then in a little while, whether that's a couple of minutes, a couple hours, maybe the next day, I don't know, whatever it is for you, you're not going to feel that way anymore. Eventually you're going to be in a non-depressed state. And so if you can learn to kind of trust the process in that moment that it's I'm not always going to feel this way, you can take steps to move forward if you look back and say, okay, what were the things that led up to this feeling right here once you're in a more calm state. Again, we're kind of going into the emotional management and how to process those things again, but learning to get out of that, it's never ever going to be different, is a huge first step in healing from any sort of depression you may be feeling.
Absolutely. And momentary times is what he's talking about is if you are, been doing well for a while, things have been going well, something occurs. And when something occurs, you process it. You're going through this information, this current information, this limited information that you have in your way of dealing with it, which may or may not be healthy in that moment. But what he's saying is to avoid getting into states of depression to where it gets to levels of hopelessness and despair, the first realization is this is just this moment in time. It's just a
Right.
moment. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to continue on. It doesn't mean that it's going to escalate and be ongoing. Let me evaluate it for why am I hurting? What's going on to where my feelings got hurt, or I'm feeling some sense of loss or hopelessness, or I'm feeling some sense of things aren't going well. Why aren't they going well? And again, having a sounding board, having somebody you can discuss things with, even a close friend or relative, and getting those words out, either through journaling or even through a conversation, can be beneficial. Learn to heal from experiential traumas and experiences that were abusive and neglectful in your life. And we just touched on this. One, go look at our experiential healing, where we talk about how do you truly have healing, or I'm sorry, experiential healing, which is number one, you got to have understanding about yourself and others. You have to learn to have cognitive and emotional empathy, which means that you understand what other people's thoughts are and feelings are, not what yours would be in their situation. When you're putting yourself in their situation, which is your current state of knowledge and experience and emotional state of being, that's sympathetic and compassionate in its nature. Empathetic in its nature is literally looking at the world the way they view the world. What's going on with them emotionally, what's going on with them experientially, what's going on with them cognitively, and what's going on with them biologically. When you're able to do that, you have a better understanding and acceptance for it couldn't be any different. And when you understand that truth, that it was inevitable, couldn't have been any different, it gives you a state of humility. Heck, if I were them, I'd be doing that. If I was in their situation, I would have done exactly what they did because my biological, cognitive experience and emotional states of being in that moment in time would have been the same. So that's where humility comes in, so important. So that humility and the empathy together all of a sudden leads you to let go of the bitterness and resentment you feel towards somebody for some wrongdoing, either towards you or somebody that you love and care about. And when you're able to forgive in that way, and I'm not talking about pardoning and condoning, but when you're able to forgive by letting go of the bitterness and resentment, wishing it was different, then that's when the healing sets in and you stop being triggered by those things. So again, that's the 2-minute version of the what we do, a 60-minute teaching on it.
Yeah.
So go
Something
watch
like
that
that.
teaching a couple times. It'll
The
start to
Cliff Notes
reinforce.
version.
Learn to build your sense of self-esteem. And learning to build your sense of self-esteem, we did a video on this as well, means you valuing who you are, you liking who you are. And if there's things that you don't like about yourself, they can be different if and when you put time into you. And I always told Patrick, especially when he was going through his transition of becoming a healthier and better version of himself, make time for you.
Hmm.
Have some Patrick time, some me time, where you have no responsibility or obligation to any other human being. And he took that serious so that he scheduled time for himself to go have me time, whatever that meant.
Yeah, go have a date night for yourself. Just take yourself on a date, whatever you like to do. And use that time to. For me, it was going to a bookstore and just putting in like some white noise stuff, and you just sit and think, or you pull out books that look interesting to you. Um, and pick a few chapters that sound cool, read through them, something like that. Reflect on it. Well, how can I apply this to my life? It could be a self help book. For me, at one time, it was a book about Buddhism, even, and it just interesting. That's where that idea of it's just a moment in time actually comes from. It's a teaching that they taught. So just make time to treat yourself, if you will.
Yeah, and making time for yourself is both for pleasurable activities as well as self-improvement time. There's a time to not get into necessarily escape behavior, but going to do something that you really get joy and pleasure from that doesn't have a negative detriment and isn't sucking your time away from you.
All right.
And then there's times to really work on you, which could be through one-on-one conversations, you reading a book, you watching a video, you watching a teaching like this, you getting involved with groups. If you enjoy like going to do group activities like a hike or bowling or arts and crafts and other types of things where groups come together, but that's the me time. You're not feeling obligated to go do it because somebody's wanting you or demanding you to go do it. That's what we mean by the me time. Learn to build healthy relationships. And these are interpersonal relationships in many different forms: coworker relationships, friends, family, intimate partner, children, parents. Everything is learn to build healthy relationships. And healthy relationships are not independent in their nature. Healthy relationships are not dependent in their nature. Healthy relationships are not codependent in their nature. Healthy relationships are where you have a healthy interdependent relationship to meet each other's need for positive relationship. And those things come in many different forms that we'll discuss coming up here in our when we discuss intimate
Relationships.
relationships specifically. But we're also
Get
going to
excited
touch
for that one.
yeah, we're also going to touch on friendships. We're also going to touch on coworker relationships when we talk about education and employment. So again, building healthy relationships means that they're mutually beneficial in positive ways, not to where codependent, like somebody feels the need to be needed and somebody needs somebody. That's unhealthy because there's levels of dependency. That's why they call it codependence. And then dependence means is like a little child. They're dependent on their parents for things. That shouldn't be the nature of adult relationships or even mutual teenage relationships or peer relationships, I should say. But again, building healthy relationships is avoiding independence, like, oh, I don't need you. Dependence, oh, I need you. And codependence, where it's an unhealthy need for one another. So again, interdependent relationships. If you haven't heard these terms, look them up. I'm sure they'll provide a lot more insight to what I'm talking about. And finally, we have learned to take better care of your biological health. So again, we're addressing the emotional processes, the experiential processes, the cognitive processes, and also the biological processes. And again, we'll probably do an entire teaching on each of those four if we haven't. We already did the experiential healing. We're touched on a lot of the cognition and the self-esteem and self-confidence and self-worth teaching that we did, but we really need to get in depth probably to the biological and also the emotional
Right.
management one. And then finally, we're going to wrap it up with common hotline numbers. So if you are in a life-threatening emergency, always dial 911. Do not call a friend or family member. Call 911 and get emergency help out to you. If you or a loved one is having suicidal thoughts, call the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. It's 24/7. There's somebody there that cares, that's trained, that wants you to get to a state of being to where you want to be here, to you see that you have value. They want to be able to get it. They'll get a crisis team out to you if they need to, and they'll help you work through whatever you're working with in that state of moment. So if you got to call the thing 20 times, that's okay. If you got to call it 50 times, that's okay. If you only needed to call it once, that's okay. And after you have called it, follow up with some of the resources that get provided to you. And that includes these type of teachings, going and meeting with a professional counselor or psychologist or psychiatrist or nurse practitioner to get the help that you're needing for something that might be inadequate or unhealthy within you. That's all that's going on. And if anybody else was going through with what you're going through, they'd be in that same state of being that you are, the same state of feeling that you are. You're not alone, and you're not any worse off or better than any other human being. It's just unique to you.
Right.
We include the National Youth Crisis Hotline. So if you're a teenager or a youth and you want to be able to talk to somebody that really understands you, there's a crisis hotline. Program these numbers into your phones. Everybody has cell phones these days. Program these numbers and put them into your emails if you need to, so you can easily access them. Domestic violence hotline. If there's domestic violence going on between your parents, if you're a teenager listening or a child listening, if there's domestic violence going on with you or a spouse or a loved one, get them this information. They can provide shelters. They can provide ways to get out of these things. Programs for both people that are involved in the situation of domestic violence. Again, domestic violence is just mental, verbal, physical, and sexual violence that's going on within people who dwell with one another. It doesn't always have to be people who are married. It's people who live together. It's a domestic situation, and it potentially has the ability to escalate it into violence or even physical or sexual harm towards one or the other. So that's all I got. Anything that you want to close out with, Patrick?
No, as always, if you have any other further questions or anything, leave them in the comments below. We'll get to them when we get to them. But this one went really well. It's probably our best workshop one yet, I think.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely, the more we do these things, the more, fluid we're going to kind of flow with them. We already understand the material. Eventually, we're going to do live shows where we can have people either come on the show or call in to be able to discuss, unique situations for themselves and how to process through them. And like we always say, keep becoming a better version of yourself. That's the goal of these teachings. That's the goal of this channel. And if you ever want to reach out to Patrick and I, feel free to post comments in the live chat, or do comments down below if you're watching on replay. And Patrick and I will get back in touch with you. Take care, all. We'll see you next time.
Bye bye.